Hi, everybody. This is Justin from the Generation Zen podcast. You could probably tell from the title that this episode is going to be a bit different than the other episodes you're used to hearing. Now, normally, we do shows that are funny, that are fun, with lots of laughs, but this episode is not going to be anything like that. Podcast crew that I work with on the show behind the scenes, and I said to them that I want to bring on my friend, Dan Ryans. Dan is an activist in the Black Lives Matter movement, and he's a great friend of mine. I wanted to bring him on the show to educate us and tell us what he's been going through in his life and his experiences, and inform every one of us on the show what's been really going on. As a podcast host and the creator of the show, I feel like I have an obligation to give someone like Dan a platform to speak his mind and educate all of us. What I care about is educating myself, educating the crew, and educating the audience on what's really going on. I'm not the person to be explaining this, and that's why I brought on a team of people who do. I'm so thankful that Dan was able to join us for this episode to give his perspectives on the racial injustices that we're seeing throughout the country and what he's experienced in his life. Here at Generation Zen, we're proud to stand with the Black Lives Matter movement, as this is a human rights issue, not a political issue. This is about the men, women, and children in the black community who face discrimination every day just because of the color of their skin. It's important that we all stand together and speak up against these injustices that happen on a daily basis. I'm not going to be silent. No one here on the show is going to be silent. And we're taking a stand against racial inequality that we're seeing throughout the country. Black Lives Matter. And I thank you for listening to this episode and giving Dan a chance to speak his mind. All right, Dan, the floor is yours. Why don't you tell us what's going through your head right now and give us your thoughts on the situation?
I'm overwhelmed, to be quite honest with you. How's it going, guys? By the way, I'm sorry I didn't say hi, but yeah, I'm incredibly overwhelmed, and I'm excited to let out my feelings to you guys. I need to do it somewhere, so it's good that I'm doing here. On talk with my twin brother, who's out in Missouri right now, so you can obviously imagine what things are like over there and stuff. But my brother and I, we had a long conversation the other day, and we're both taken aback by everything that's going on because it seems to be something that just continues to happen, and we could keep talking about why it happens, or the historical circumstances surrounding it, but I just never, I just can't think of why. That there's always that underlying reason for things, and but I don't know. It's just something that I can't answer. It's crazy. It's insane.
So I know you were at a protest recently. Do you want to tell us about your experience with that?
Yeah, I was in Story Park in New York City on Monday, and I wasn't planning on protesting. That I will say, um, I will defend that. I was not going to plan on it. I was actually walking because I'm trying to lose weight, and you have to do some exercise to do that. So I was doing my workout regimen, which is walking, and I sat on a bench, just to take in all of the fresh air and look at the nice east water of the East River and stuff. And then all of a sudden, I look to my left as I'm about to continue walking, and I see these people walking down. There's just a couple of people holding up signs, Black Lives Matter, and I'm saying, well, that's cool. At least there's a couple of people around here, because Astoria wasn't really that involved at that point in time. So when I saw that, I was like, okay, cool. Finally, we got some people in Astoria that's willing to speak out. So I didn't really think much of it. I just thought maybe it was just two people holding up signs and walking around trying to get people involved, but it didn't seem like it was working. And as I was walking and trying to, continue my walking workout, I look back to my left and I see another crowd of people coming down holding up signs. So then my thought was, okay, well, it's still not too many people, but it does seem like something is boiling up and I should, stick around to see what's going on. About 5 minutes passes and again, nothing's really materializing. So I just figure, okay, well, it's not going to be much of a big protest, so I'm just going to leave. But then as I'm walking to the other side of the park, out of nowhere, you see this crowd of people, big crowd of people that filled up the street, coming down, and they're holding signs. They have candles. They have, you know, they're wearing masks. It's insane. Their shirts. They're wearing shirts too. So like I was stunned. And once I saw that big crowd, I knew I had to stay because I knew it was going to be much bigger than I thought.
It's kind of funny how you were like disheartened and you were gonna leave because it just you felt alone and that no one was actually doing anything about it.
And look, and I was just glad to be at the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Because when I started doing that Instagram live, uh, before I started taking all those pictures, it made me feel a lot better knowing that it was in my hometown that people were in support of a movement that was pretty much dismissed for a long time.
Hmm.
That no one really cared about, that continues to this day to be very controversial, which I never understand. So it was good to see that everyone was getting involved, and I was just I don't know, it got a little emotional, but I had to take it all in.
Yeah, I feel like there's something really powerful about just being together with a lot of people who are united in that front. And I feel like there's sort of a disconnect on social media. So also, I was kind of curious about how you felt about some of the people who are just posting on social media all the time. Like, do you feel like it's as effective as some people maybe think it is, or
Certainly social media has a leverage, because especially if you're a celebrity, because if you're very popular on social media amongst the whole crowd,
Mhm.
and you can get that attention to other people, you can spread your message, you're going to change people's lives. So it certainly is good that more people are speaking out about it, especially a much more diverse crowd. It's not just people of color, it's every every person in the human race, which is absolutely tremendous. I think
And
it's great that you have stars just getting involved.
another thing I
Mhm.
think is really something I've seen that's been really impactful with social media is, I mean, just from my own experience, in terms of attending a protest and learning information about the movement and what's going on around us. I found out about the protest I attended because of social media, people sharing like protests and times and places and when they're occurring and things like that. So it's been
Yeah.
really useful in terms
Hmm.
of sharing information, and it's
Mhm.
also been really good at like exposing new perspectives to some people who, for some reason, like you said, do feel like this is a controversial stance, which is ridiculous in my opinion as well, to say that this movement's controversial. But yeah, and I guess I can just, should I tell my story about my protest I attended as
Yeah.
well?
I
Just
actually
to
just
like,
want to say one thing before, while we're on the topic of social media. I actually think it's probably one of the most influential part of the movement of the social media. Because how would you have heard about any of the deaths between like the past few years? How have you heard about any of
Exactly.
the protests? It's
Mhm.
it's actually I think one of the most important
Not
parts.
even the deaths, but if you think back to the issue in Central Park with I forget the lady's name, but how that young man was literally fearing for his life when that white woman called the police, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
in that fake whole controversy thing going on there with
Mhm.
threatening her life. So I
Right.
forget. I'm sorry if I forget the name, but yeah, even that, just putting that on social media and it blew up like crazy.
Right, that was the
So
guy
Yeah.
who was like, "Can you please take your dog out of this part of the park? It's
Yeah.
just no
Oh, I
dogs." And
saw
she was
that.
like,
Yeah.
"I'm gonna call the cops, and I'm gonna tell them an African
Mhm.
American male is harassing me." And I'm like,
He
"Holy
was
shit!"
weaponizing the police, is what she was
Yeah.
doing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Exactly. Mhm.
So social media, there you go.
Another thing with social media, exactly on this topic, is it kind
Mhm.
of serves as like a indisputable testimony of what's happening. If you record and you post what's going on, people can't really argue with video evidence if it's unedited footage. So, for example, things I've seen online are like people proving that protests have been very peaceful and often would show video evidence of cops instigating violence and looting and rioting. And one video I just saw recently that was really jarring that I just shared was footage of police destroying their own vehicle to try and blame it on protesters,
Right.
which
Wow.
is
I saw that
yeah.
too. Isn't that
I-
disgusting?
yeah. Same with the store windows and such. I saw that as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of so that's one of the great thing about social media right now is it's kind of like an information network. People are sharing, people are posting, and people are just kind of spreading videos, and because a lot of these videos end up deleted, but if people share them, people save them, and then the videos don't disappear as easily.
Yeah.
The coolest thing about communication, especially online, is that once it's uploaded, it's there forever. You could take it down, you could do whatever on your end. But
Mhm.
once that gets shared, that spreads like wildfire, especially if it's something so crazy that people are going to notice.
Mhm.
So it's something that if you're going to post on anything, you have to be very careful, you know, to make sure because people will get their hands on your
Mhm.
post.
And it
Jeremy,
just
you were talking about how you attended a protest too. Do you want to talk about that? What your
sure.
experience was like?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I actually attended my first protest ever for anything today. It was for Long Island locals listening. It was in Huntington by the Big H shopping center by the Home Depot, and it was so basically the way it worked was everybody parked it was a large parking lot. Everybody parked there, and they all kind of congregated around 4:30, and this was like a march style protest. So everybody congregated, and then we marched along New York Avenue for people who are familiar with the local area, and marched through like Main Street of Huntington, which is like where all the restaurants and stuff are. Basically, people were being very respectful of each other. People were like social distancing, wearing masks. Everybody had signs, and as we were marching along the street and marching through Main Street in Huntington, we were chanting different chants, such as like say their names, George Floyd, say her name, Breonna Taylor, things like that to try and chanting, of course, Black Lives Matter. And it was actually really great energy from everyone there. A vast majority of the people who we interacted with were very supportive of the movement. Like as we passed by, like restaurant owners and stuff, some of them handed us water. Some of them, most people who were in vehicles who, as we passed by, honked their horns in support. It was actually really, from what I've seen, the Long Island protests have not escalated in terms of the police violence comparatively to New York City. Suffolk PD seems like they're being a lot more respectful of protesters. We actually even had a police officer kind of guiding us through the streets, and police officers kind of blocked off the streets so we could go through, which was actually kind of like how they would if it was a parade.
Nice.
Yeah. Which was actually very kind of them. One thing that was definitely powerful is as we passed by police every time, we would always chant like "hands up, don't shoot," which was like really impactful to me. That really stood out to me. But yeah, that's kind of been my experience in terms of this protest I went to. I'm probably going to go to another one, same area tomorrow.
I guess while we're on the topic, do we want to talk about how you can protest safely during a pandemic, and how do we feel about such large gatherings at this time?
During a pandemic, it's tough because you're trying to avoid situations where you can catch the virus.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously in New York City, especially here in Queens, it's difficult because it was the epicenter of the city. So, when you're trying to do that, it's tough, but it's worth the risk because what it does is it allows you to fight for something that's right. It's not right that people die in the streets. It's never right. It never will be right. And obviously, if there's reasons to kill someone, that's one thing. But on matters of your skin color, it's never okay. So it's hard, but if you have the knack, no, I even supported the protests for people wanting to reopen the country because they felt their freedoms were being taken away. I supported that too, even though I didn't agree with it. I supported their right to protest. So I definitely support the right to protest in this case, and I think it's a very good cause. It's a tough decision to make, but it's definitely a good thing to do.
Right, and it kind of goes hand in hand with something you said before, which was the trend going around with the All Lives Matter and sort of taking attention away from just the Black Lives Matter. I'm not sure exactly your thoughts on it, but I'd like to hear what you think about people saying that and sort of omitting the Black Lives Matter.
Obviously, when it really comes down to it, the All Lives Matter comment does move away from the reality of the situation. And I know it's tough to get into the race argument because a lot of people don't want to talk about it. It's very uncomfortable. People tend to avoid it. So it's hard to talk about it, but you can't just say all lives matter as a way to deflect from certain situations. And I feel like that's what people are doing. They're not necessarily racist or anything. They're just trying to deflect the situation.
It seems
because
like
they don't want to
sorry.
get into conversations about race. And but the reality situation is it is about race, and we have to make sure that when we are talking about the situation, as much as all lives matter, Black lives matter.
Right.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, because I hear I don't agree with it personally, but I feel like some people are sort of looking at it the wrong way, and they're seeing it as Black Lives Matter, and they're saying, well, what about me? Doesn't my life matter? And it should go without saying that yeah, of course all lives matter, but I like the saying going around lately is all lives don't matter until Black Lives matter. And that makes a lot of sense because
Yes,
all lives
yes.
can't matter until everyone's life matters.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it actually
okay.
reminds me of this brief comic that I saw that I think some of you had probably seen before, but I think I might have shared it at some point, or I think Jeremy actually shared it.
Actually, I
On
did share it.
Twitter,
I
right?
think I know which one you're talking
Yeah,
about. A house?
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So you can explain that one because I don't remember
Okay.
super well, but yeah.
So basically, I've seen a lot of really good illustrations to help people visualize the All Lives Matter comment compared to Black Lives Matter. One is the example that Amanda just brought up, where it's basically a picture of two houses. One's on fire and one's not. And there's a guy with a hose, and he's spraying water on the house that's not on fire. The person is, there's a person with him kind of like, wait, why are you spraying water on that house? He's like, well, all houses matter. And then the guy's like, but there's a house right over there that's currently on fire, and there's a lot of terrible things going on right over there. Why don't you address that one? He's like, well, I don't want my house to catch fire, so I'm going to make sure it's wet and make sure it's all good to go. And he's like, I'm sure the owner of that home could fix it himself. And it's like, well, the owner of the home died in the fire and he's dead. Basically, it's a visualization showing like if you're saying things like all lives matter, you're detracting from the fact that there's clearly a present danger for Black lives. Another good one I saw that I shared just recently was there was someone who like broke their legs, and then there was like a paramedic who rushed over like, oh my God, are you okay? And then there's someone standing there perfectly healthy like, what about my legs? And it was just
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
that one I thought was pretty funny. But yeah, there's been a lot of really good illustrations to kind of show the hypocrisy of all lives matter. Obviously all lives matter, but like Tom said, all lives don't matter till Black lives matter too. Also, I think somebody asked me to talk about like the health precautions at the protest I was at, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I'll just explain that briefly. Every post I've seen for advertising these protests were like, you must wear masks. You must, you have to wear masks. You have to be respectful and kind to others. Social distancing. So basically, everybody was marching, but like not like bunched up next to each other. We were kind of like had a respectful distance for each other. Everybody had masks. A lot of people had hand sanitizer, and as soon as they were to return home, like I overheard someone say, okay, before we go to the car, let's put on hand sanitizer and make sure we're like safe. So everybody was pretty aware of coronavirus and the real threat that the pandemic is, but they know it's like a serious thing. This isn't the reopen crowd. There's not a whole lot of overlap between those two protests, so nobody was like saying that we should be able to just walk freely without precautions. So yeah, basically everybody was being kind and respectful towards each other. Also, I know that Amanda wanted me to mention something about my protest as well, so I'm just gonna throw that in there too. Right before the protest started, it was interesting. There was two African American men who approached our protest group. Apparently, they do this every time before people march, and they were saying how they basically mentioned how they felt that the march was unnecessary and that it was endangering people more because change was already happening and there was already justice served and changes were being made. But and they were saying the more important thing is that you register to vote, which obviously I'm going to say right now, registering to vote and voting in all forms of elections extremely important if you want to make any sort of change. If whoever's listening, if you're not registered to vote, please do it. But yeah, so it was interesting. They were saying how you please just vote instead. They were mentioning how like it's endangering their children's lives and things like that, which I think is an interesting argument that they made. And it seemed like the perspective of the marchers was, why can't we do both? Why can't we register to vote and vote, but also show and stand in solidarity with the community and Black lives? So I thought that was an interesting first impression of the protest. It was immediately, individuals trying to like discourage it, and it was from a group of people I didn't expect, if that makes sense. But yeah, any thoughts if anyone wants to comment on that?
Actually, that's incredibly interesting. Where there's been protests all throughout many years, and things haven't really been changing. So I would expect the fact that we're protesting more would actually is what's causing the change.
Yeah,
That's an interesting
especially
point there. And
especially because like yes, recently justice has been served for the police officers who were involved in the killing of George Floyd, but there's still the instance with Breonna Taylor, who was the paramedic who police broke into her house. She was a paramedic working very hard during the coronavirus crisis. Police broke into her house and shot her indiscriminately. She did nothing wrong. And those police officers have not been charged. So there is a belief among many protesters that I personally agree with, that justice isn't served until it's universal, and justice isn't. And this movement, I mean, protests aren't over until there's real change made with police power and, to address the power imbalance that currently exists, if that makes sense.
And that takes time. That's not something that happens overnight, and that's what people have to sort of understand. Like, we didn't like having schools be integrated didn't happen overnight. Acceptance wasn't overnight either. So it's something that just has to take time. But if you believe in the process and you're trying to get stuff done, then it's all worth it at the end of the day.
Exactly. And that's why I think, stopping the protests just because some change is being made is not really an effective way to do it,
We've seen this time and time again. Something happens that's like good for this movement, and then we stop the protest, and then it happens all over again. It's a cycle that just continues and continues, and unless we stop, we have to continue voicing it. Otherwise, it's just going to continue.
Yeah, like, because that actually leads into a question I did want to ask you, which was like, how can we keep the momentum of this movement going? Because I think that on social media, what tends to happen is we get justice served for a case, or maybe we don't, but over social media, things tend to lose their relevancy quickly. So, like, how would we be able to just keep being active in this movement?
Well, you have so many organizations out there
Mhm.
that do this on a daily basis. Donate to that cause. And then, of course, you guys talking about voting.
Mhm.
If you have a congressperson or a mayor or a governor county executive, whatever the case may be, if you have someone that's representing you local and they're not doing anything about it to help advance the cause, vote them out and vote
Mhm.
in for the people that stand with you. That's important because the more we get those people in, the more change will happen.
Mhm.
Exactly. And there's so many ways to support, even if, like, say, if you're afraid of exposing yourself to COVID, for example, there's so many ways that you can actually get involved, even from your own home. Because, like, it's totally understandable if you feel uncomfortable going out and protesting amongst amid a pandemic. It's kind of a serious deterrent to go outside your house, let alone congregate with a massive group of people. But people, like you just said, Dan, you can donate. There's so many organizations out there who are willing to, who are doing so much for this movement, who would appreciate any financial support, which we should link below, of course, in this podcast episode. There's also ways to donate even if you don't have money. There are actually many YouTube videos surfacing that are filled to the brim with ads, and all the ad proceeds are going to go to donating to movements that support Black Lives Matter. And a lot of those videos are filled with cultural music from culturally Black music and art and things like that. And it's actually like really beautiful that people put this together in order to try and raise money in a way that doesn't, some people are struggling financially during this time. So anyone can support it if you want to.
Yep, exactly. And then I noticed Sean King, who's active in a lot of things, a lot of African American matters. He's a Bernie crat. For those of you who supported Bernie Sanders, he even for a while has been, he keeps talking about these racial issues. Recently, he was out telling people to make phone calls to people in Minnesota or people across the country, telling them we need police reform now. We need to change how it's how things are working in this country in terms of racial bias. So stuff like that as well. If you have time to call your representatives or at least hold them accountable, tweet them, whatever the case may be. That's something that you can also do. It's not just donating money; it's donating your time. You
You
have
can,
it.
you can also sign petitions. There's plenty of petitions out there to get justice for the people who have been killed. There's petitions to reform. There are, like you said, you can call your representatives. There's also automated text and email functions that you can do to email your representatives or your governor or whoever's in charge. There is Amanda, you actually shared this with me so you could speak on it more, an automated text function to repeal a law. Amanda, if you want to chime in on that
Mhm.
one.
Oh yeah, sure. So it's if you text sign Ristus to 50409, you can automatically just put your name and just put in your information. You don't even have to click a link or anything. You just put all of your information in there, and then you're actually signing a petition to repeal 50A, which has allowed police misconduct to basically kind of be under wraps. So by repealing that, that would actually be something that would really contribute to some form of change. And then you can just put your address in, and then when you put that information in there, it automatically sends off a letter that's already kind of in their system off to a representative about repealing 50A, your local representatives. So I feel like that's also something really good that we can do.
Yeah, Dan, one thing that I'm actually doing, going off that too, is for New Jersey. I'm creating a spreadsheet, and it's an open spreadsheet. You can edit it. You don't even have to have a Google account. You can just open the link and click it. There's some names that I added right there, and some other people added names as well of just a bunch of representatives in local districts, and also the governor, Senator Cory Booker, and a couple other people where you can call their numbers and there's emails.
Who's that? Cory Booker. You're calling him out too. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a bunch of different phone numbers on there with emails, and all you got to do is go in the spreadsheet, you click the phone number, and then you can make a call. And the reason I did that is just because I want like a master resource of people to go in and click a number, and then you have to call instead of looking up and trying to search it. Because I want to do action for this, Dan. I want to side with people who are actually doing something, and I don't want to sit idly by. And no one here is, and that's why I'm really proud of everyone on the show, because we're all doing something, even if we necessarily can't go outside and protest due to COVID and our family members at home. But we're all trying to do something, and for me, I'm very passionate about giving a phone call and telling a representative how we feel.
And the fact that you're making it public is huge, because a lot of things, that stuff's not. You have to look it up. It's public, but you have to look it up, and it's hard to find. So when you have that master resource, it makes a lot of stuff much easier. So I thank you for even thinking about that, because that's a pretty cool thing to have in this case, especially if you're in the middle of such dire circumstances.
Put it this way, you might not know who people even are in who are serving the state. Like people don't realize, as crazy it is, that there's a lieutenant governor and people who serve under the lieutenant governor. It's not just the governor. It's not just the senator. They have people in their office. So I'm trying to get people's names in that office, so that way more people in that district and more people who serve that representative gets the point across.
Yeah, and actually, sorry, I was just gonna say that my friend actually came up with templates that people can use. So like if people don't really know exactly what they should say, or if they end up having to leave a voicemail, like my friend made these templates that people can use for basically every scenario. So I want to make sure that I link that. But
oh,
yeah.
That's great, because it can get nervous on the phone. but
Exactly.
But giving
Yeah.
a phone call, it does so much. And Dan, you could vouch for me on this, because I know you've done it. When you call, it gets your point across way more than a text or an email.
Yeah, I mean, texting, sending emails, that stuff can easily be deleted, because they can easily ignore that. But when you hear the voice of someone that's angry about something, or they're passionate about something, it affects them, because it's not just someone standing by anonymously. It's an actual voice coming from people that you're serving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think
elected officials to understand.
I think it's really impactful to have human voices attached to this movement. Like, because it's one thing to have numbers on a petition, and it's one thing to text and call and like email, but to have an actual voice say, "I'm outraged with what's happening, and there needs to be changed. This needs to be changed," really does have an impact that texting and signing things won't really have. And also, just to add to what Justin and Amanda were saying in terms of creating templates and creating resources that make it easier for people to be active, I think the best thing you can possibly do if you want is to gather resources and make it as easy as possible for people to be active. The easier you make it, the more likely people are to do it. I mean, it's just human nature. If something's easy, they're more willing to do it. So if you create resources and you create, information centers and make activism easy, then yeah, it's a lot more likely.
Who you talk to, the people that are running against them.
As good as the protests are, and I'm really all for them, I think one of the negative side effects is that the police and minority clashing is getting worse right now. And I think that protests are going to stop the the random killings of minorities, but how do we mend the relationship? How do we build trust again? Because right now tensions are so high, and they just keep climbing and climbing.
So difficult, pretty much at a breaking point where they don't trust the police protecting our community. It really sucks, because I believe in the police, to be quite honest with you, even though I don't like the fact that there's racist cops out there and no one's doing anything about it. I still have a lot of trust that the police will come in and protect our community like they were sworn to do so. but I agree. It's hard to see that happening, and the best way to help fix that relationship between the people and the police is obviously police reform, but what's that going to do? There's still going to be racists out there, in the police force. So I guess that the best thing to do is have conversations, town halls, community policing. I've been huge on that. Police
Okay.
officers, getting to know the community, getting to know the people for who they are, and because a lot of times you have police officers responding. I don't even think they even know who they're actually serving, what community they're actually in, people that live there. So definitely something like that can be very useful. And I know New York and Minneapolis, Chicago, Detroit, they're all cities where they have thousands, millions of people.
Hmm.
But definitely having the officers involved in your community as best as they possibly can, as much as they can as well, definitely helps because you get to see they get to be best friends with you, and you get to know them and you build trust with them.
That's a good point. Having the cops actually be a part of the community and not just driving through it and just going on to different areas. They should be more focused on maybe smaller areas instead of like constantly being moved to different precincts and different areas. Actually try to l- figure out the people you're charged to protect. I agree with that a lot.
That they move precincts. No, if you're in a precinct, unless you're moving to a different area, of course, then you stay there and you build trust in your community. Like that's if you know people, like that's something that will help you. That helps
Mhm.
the individual person. It helps the cops.
And I think there's a lot of way more than we're admitting. There's a lot of bad cops out there right now, and you can see it all over the internet, all over the news that the cops are reacting very negatively to the protesters with a lot of violence right off the bat, and they're being very, very aggressive. And I kind of
There's
want to know what anyone's
Yeah,
thoughts are on that.
these riots and all this stuff, tearing down stores and you know hurting innocent people. It's instigated pretty much on both the rioters themselves and the police. The police are instigating these looting scenarios to happen. It's pretty rough to see that as well because for the longest time we always thought, well, the rioting is because people are just fed up and tired of it. So rather than protesting peacefully, they're just going to mess up all these different places and tear up other innocent people and affect their lives. But really, a lot of it is the police instigating the whole issue.
Mhm. They one thing I've also seen. I'm gonna say a couple things real quick, so feel free to interrupt if anyone needs to. But yeah, so one thing I've seen is that the communities are rallying behind the people whose stores have been looted. People who are like, well, I don't condone looting. I mean, like, well, I don't think anybody really like loves looting things, but it's like the communities who are the protesting are supporting these businesses that have been destroyed. So, and often the looting and rioting, as you said, was instigated by police. So, in many situations, that's not really a fair thing to criticize the protest for because it's entirely separate. But on the topic of police reform, because I have something open on my phone that I think is relevant. But before I say that, one comment I want to make. I know you, Dan, you mentioned about building communities, and if cops knew the people, they'd be less likely to commit violence against them. I did hear, and someone can fact check me on this if I'm wrong. I hear that the police officer who uh, killed George Floyd, I'm not going to say his name, but I will say George Floyd's name, um, actually knew George, and they were former coworkers, and that's part of.
It's a nightclub, correct? If I'm not
Yes, they
mistaken.
were security at a nightclub together, is what I heard. So that's why people are making the argument that his charge should be upgraded to first degree murder because you could make the argument it was premeditated because they knew each other. So just wanted to point out that cops knowing the people they're supposed to protect does not automatically ensure that there won't be violence because clearly
It
in
doesn't
George Floyd's case.
nothing is ever automatic,
Well, of
but
course, yes.
it certainly helps the issue because
Yes,
you
of
get to
course.
know who's good in your community and who's bad in your community. I know that can be a little bit problematic because then you can have your own bias. But at the same time, you can also know that if someone's in trouble, you can help them. And that's what policing should be about. Not just about making arrests, not just
Mm.
about filing paperwork and trying to put this person in jail, whatever. It should also be about helping those that need the help, need the resources.
hmm like kind of jumping off of that, I wanted to ask, like, if you think that maybe if we were able to improve like screening or training in some way for the police that we're taking onto the workforce, that would maybe improve, or at least like that would maybe improve this situation. Because actually, one of the statistics I saw too, this is kind of like a little bit mostly related to it, but the fact that there is a study that from 2013 to 2019, 99% of killings by police didn't result with a charge or a conviction. So
I've
I
seen that
feel like,
statistic too.
yeah, it's just so crazy. I just wanted to kind of know your thoughts on that.
It's devastating to see that, especially if you had a wrongful killing. Like, this is a killing that did not need to happen. It was murder, 100%, and it's tough to see that statistic, to hear that statistic. My bad, but what you can do is you could do the best you can to reform, but even reform is hard because no one knows the true answer to that.
hmm
hmm Um, what I've seen proposed for reform to the police, I actually have it open right now. I saw a chart called the hashtag for it is hashtag 8 can't wait. It's 8 reforms they feel that should be made to the people feel should be made to the police force right away. And it has to do largely with violence. I'll just read off the 8 right now. One is banning the use of chokeholds and strangleholds to restrain people. Two is to require de-escalating situations before you resort to violence. 3 is to require warning before shooting. 4 is to exhaust all alternatives before shooting. 5 is to intervene with violence whenever you can, intervene during violence whenever you can to prevent it. 6 is ban shooting at moving vehicles because it could hit others. 7 is to establish the use of force continuum. Basically, from what I understand, that means to establish a kind of like methodology to understand when to use force. And actually, let me see
Right.
how they describe that real quick, because it says that certain cities have restrict higher levels of force. So basically, it's restricting higher levels of force. And then number 8 is to require all force that cops commit to be reported. So if you ever have to engage actively in a situation that requires force, you have to report it, and it goes on your record. So those are the reforms people are proposing. So I just wanted to say that because I had it open. I just felt like it was during this discussion, it was worth bringing up.
Say it's certainly a start, and obviously you can propose this and hopefully come to a compromise.
There was another one that I saw, Jeremy, too, and I actually saw this a couple weeks ago when this first happened. This was tweeted by Kyle Kolinski. He posted this, and I thought this was real powerful. I'll read it real quick, and then I know Tom's got something to say. It's a list of 10 things, and I'll read them quick. The first one was end broken windows policing. Number 2 is community oversight, which Dan said very well earlier. Number 3 is limit use of force. 4 is independently investigate and prosecute. So the police should not be policing the police. As weird as it is to say, that's exactly what's happening right now. There needs to be an independent committee. Number 5, community representation, as Dan said. Number 6 is mandatory body cameras and filming the police all times. Number 7, as Amanda said before, is training. Number 8 is end for-profit policing. Number 9 is demilitarization, meaning take away tear gas. And number 10 is fair police union contracts. Sorry, Tom. I want to say that real quick. I know you got a lot to say.
No, you're all good. I just wanted to say, that kind of relates to what I was going to say, actually, is, people want a voice, they want to say in how policing is done. And right now, they really don't have a way. And they've been trying for years to be heard, and just things haven't been working out for them. So they take to protesting, and then we get people that complain that they're not protesting the right way. But I wanted to ask you, Dan, is there really a right way to protest?
No, of course not. I think that any person that says there's a right way to protest, all these arguments are going to be completely absurd because nothing is done perfectly. There's always going to be flaws to any type of movement that you do. There was a flaw in, you know, in the, back in the '60s with the civil rights. There was many flaws to it. There were flaws to legislations made. So anything that you do is always going to have an issue. But that it's the fact that you're doing it that matters, that gets people attention. And if you're able to get the attention of the people and change people's lives, that's all that matters.
Yeah, I don't think there's really a wrong way to protest, as long as
There's no one
as
gets
long
hurt, really.
yeah, as long as you're not hurting anyone, as long as
Mhm.
you're not actively engaging in violence for the sake of violence. I think then in reality there's no wrong way to protest.
No,
As
of
long as
course
you're
not.
protesting for the sake of protesting and you're not doing something violent for the sake of doing something violent.
Just understanding that you're fighting for a cause and that there could be a counter rebuttal going on. Understand that too. Just make sure that you're doing things your way, and that matters. If it's gonna offend people, it's gonna offend people. There's nothing much you can do. People think different, but it's about you making sure that your voice is heard and that people are on the same page with you. If you can't get them on the same page.
Yeah, and I think the best way to get people on the same page is really to be open to discussion, because I've seen a lot of people just strictly invalidate other perspectives and granted, I personally believe there are no other valid perspectives besides Black Lives Matter, but I'm also trying to create a platform where I feel open to having a conversation with people who don't agree with the movement to try and understand their perspective and see if I can give relevant statistics and show relevant information that maybe gets them to open their eyes a little bit more to my perspective. So it's one thing I think the best way to possibly keep people informed and keep trying to get everyone on the same page, like Dan said, because I think that's also the most important thing, is to be fruitful with your information, share it with as many people as you can, and be open to conversation with others to try and who may be on the other side, and try and convince them that maybe they're in the wrong. Try and have productive, informative conversations.
And this kind of stinks, but I posted a lot of my protest pictures on Instagram and Facebook. One person on Instagram actually challenged me on that very thing, the fact that I was protesting against racism, and he believed this guy. I'm going to protect his privacy, but this guy believed that everything that's going on here is made up. Obviously the killing of George Floyd is not made up, but the fact that it was for a racist reason is made up out of boredom, and it was just all fantasy, and that it's all individual case by case thing that we have to focus on, not necessarily about a systemic racial issue here. And so I was doing my best to have a civil conversation. I think it was texting back and forth, obviously, through Instagram, and obviously, it was tough to see that, but I appreciate the fact that I was looking at what he had to say, and I gave him all the time in the world to write down what he had to say, and that's one of the things I appreciate about this country is that everyone thinks differently. We can all come together and debate and do it in a simple way without having to fight each other.
Yeah, definitely agree. I was gonna say that it's hard sometimes to talk to people about their perspectives when they're only taking things for what they actually see. So if they don't see racism happening in front of them, they're like, oh no, that's not happening. Or they just kind of take everything that they're seeing, even with the media, even though it is like such a good tool for getting resources for the movement. I think in a lot of ways it can be kind of dangerous because people don't really, they kind of take everything that they see and kind of pick and choose the things that they choose to believe without really trying to find the facts behind them. But yeah, just kind of wanted to mention.
Their own alternative facts, as
Yeah.
Yes.
say today.
Alternative facts. I love
And
that.
I think
Yeah.
I think a lot of the ignorance stems from privilege, I feel, because you don't believe racism if you don't I mean, you might not believe racism if you don't experience it, right? It's a privilege to learn about racism secondhandedly, you know. I am incredibly privileged to have learned what I've learned from a secondhand experience and not have experienced it myself. And I think a lot of people who the comments, like the comment of like, if you don't see it, you don't believe it necessarily. Like, if you don't experience, if you're not a person of color who has the potential to experience racism, then you may not believe that racism really occurs around you, because it's a lot harder to understand it and perceive it if it's not happening to you up front. But if you look into it and you educate yourself about it and you identify that, yes, I am privileged and I'm aware that I'm privileged, but I know others are not, and I know what's happening. I think that's the most important thing, is to identify your own privilege and educate yourself about what's going on around you.
And it's not just about the fact that they have their own experience of not looking at racism in their eyes, but where they live too. Because, you know, where they live, they may not experience that at all from every person that lives in that neighborhood. So it's all it's a regional thing, and that's what's very interesting about this whole issue, is that it's all about what you grew up with and how you see things.
Exactly. You might live in a neighborhood that, for example, people who are on Long Island. Long Island is historically, there's actually a lot of racial politics in terms of housing and the organization of neighborhoods here. There are good articles out there. If you need to read them, we can link them below. But essentially, you know, a lot of people in Long Island, we grew up in neighborhoods that were predominantly white, and we didn't really experience, you know, even the potential for racial discrimination or, you know, racism in general, because we weren't around it. We weren't around minorities in general. And so it's like, the fact that you can pretend that racism doesn't exist when you grew up around entirely white neighborhoods where racism didn't even have the potential to exist. But the fact that you live there and it's entirely white is actually institutionalized racism. So it's like, and you're pretending that racism doesn't exist because you didn't see it in your neighborhood. But the reason you didn't see it in your neighborhood is because the way these neighborhoods were planned was racially structured. It's a whole tangent. We can go on for
Right.
like hours.
Right,
But
and just to jump off your point there, Jeremy, is that's why I think what Nickelodeon did when they aired that, I believe it was 9 minutes and 27 seconds, I believe it was, just on their channels of just the message "I can't breathe," um, right, broadcasting all throughout Nickelodeon's channels. I think it was a great thing they did, because it actually then brought up that discussion with a lot of families who maybe, wouldn't have otherwise had that conversation with their kids.
That's a ballsy move by Nickelodeon. I'll tell you that much.
Absolutely.
Very ballsy.
Because Nickelodeon, for the longest time, you have all these networks with children's programming that catered to the dominant crowd, the white dominant crowd. And not saying that blacks were never involved. Obviously, they were. They're incredible black people involved in those children's networks, but ballsy move, because you have to. It has to start when you're young. You have to understand. You have to educate when you're young that this is happening in your world, and the fact that Viacom CBS was willing to black out all their cable channels, especially Nickelodeon, which is it's a huge network for kids. With the fact that they were able to do that to start a conversation with the young ones is very good on their part, and I truly think that it could really change. And look, people are going to have criticisms. There were people who were very critical of it, and I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with having criticism. I can see how it can be problematic. How it can scare people, especially the little ones, because they're still trying to understand exactly what's going on. But it's important to feel that way. It's important to experience it. even if you can't experience it in your own life, it's good to have that experience of learning about it because it is so vital in today's world.
And I think one of the best things it does is it kind of forces parents to start the conversation. Like, if your kids are watching the show and then suddenly their show is interrupted by this message, they'll be like, Mom or Dad, why is this message on the screen? If they're not informed. And regardless of your opinion, you are forced to talk about it with your children. Unfortunately, I feel like some people would be like, oh, it's just the government trying to, or something weird like that. But,
Yeah.
you know, but I think the message of, standing in solidarity and using a portion of your airtime to air a message that can maybe spread the word to new voices is very significant. And I'm very glad that they did that.
And on the topic of
Go ahead.
corporations chiming in too, because most big companies are saying stuff, and it's really hard to take them seriously because they're just fueled by profits. They're going to say this because it's going to make the most profit. But when all those channels went on air and blacked out their screens, they lost a lot of money, and I respect the hell out of that for someone trying to spread information no matter what the cost. And that's probably one of the only companies that did it respectfully in my eyes.
You're a sports guy, just like me, and we look up to a lot of athletes. Like, I look up to LeBron James a lot when he speaks out about this stuff, and Colin Kaepernick is a big one. I think what he did was incredibly brave, and I think it's shameful that he hasn't been on a team in over 4 years now.
We talk about just want to interrupt for one second.
Sure, go ahead.
The NBA makes their statement like they totally didn't blacklist Colin Kaepernick from joining teams. Basically, they're like, we stand in solidarity. So hypocritical. That was disgusting.
Yeah, the NFL, you mean? But yes,
I
know
NFL. I'm sorry. Yeah, I meant to say NFL. I know he's a football player.
The NFL and EA Sports, which censored the word Colin Kaepernick from one of because there's a song that had Colin Kaepernick in it, and they censored a song. So yeah, that some of these companies saying
claimed it was
points.
a coincidence. I just want to.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, we didn't mean it. Of course, the one player who was basically, ostracized from the NFL for his stance. Yeah, totally. We didn't mean it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I know,
go on, Justin. I'm sorry. I just wanted to.
No worries. And obviously, there's so many other great athletes who've spoken about this, like Muhammad Ali. And real quick, there is one thing in common about all of these athletes is that they were not seen as heroes when they first did this. They were hated. Muhammad Ali, they called him an American traitor. They thought what he did was wrong. And there's all this revisionist history about them that saying, oh, everyone liked him at the time. No, they didn't. That being said, I need to know what your thoughts are about Drew Brees, because for me personally, I thought he just backpedaled because he was getting hated on. And I'm not so sure I believe that he really means that he's backtracking on it. What are your thoughts?
The situation is interesting because he was never on board. Let's just call it. He was never on board with the whole protest. He obviously has his own interests, and when it comes to financial interests, when it comes to his own personal interests, he's never really been on board. So it's interesting that he chose this time to come back to that. Like I mean, obviously people are making connections because police brutality, Colin Kaepernick, sitting then taking the knee to protest all that stuff. So it's interesting. And to be quite honest with you, as much as I support Drew's freedom to say what he wants and everything, it is frustrating because, especially when you're in a city like New Orleans, which has a nice, pretty decent black population, and you have an NFL, which is a dominant black league. When you hear that he says something like this, that's something that can really frustrate you. And it could really mean offenses. That's not something that you want to do. You want to support people, the way you can. You want to support the people that are around you. And the fact that you have not really taking your time to understand why the protest, why the outrage. It's frustrating.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you just said for sure. And I feel like in the sports realm specifically, I've noticed a lot of hypocrisy from people in terms of a lot of it centered around Colin Kaepernick and his attempt at doing peaceful protest. For example, I know Mike Pence made a statement like about, yeah, we don't condone the violence that's happening against African Americans, but meanwhile, this is the same guy who walked out of an NFL game because Colin Kaepernick was kneeling. So there's also what else was I trying to think of? Oh, there's also a lot of people who are like, I don't understand why these protests can't be entirely peaceful. It's like,
That's right, because they made fun of him for protesting 4 years ago.
exactly. Attempts at peaceful protests have not worked.
Yeah, and also, the whole thing that bothers me about it is just like, who are they to say how the community should react? Like, they're totally justified in the reaction. I mean, when you have a member of your community killed because of the color of their skin, people are going to be angry. And so the fact that people don't understand that that's justified, obviously the violence shouldn't be happening, but it's like, we have to understand, like, where the outrage is and how long it's been going on.
For sure,
it goes,
for sure.
It goes back to the question before of like the right way to protest. Kneeling is, in my opinion, a good way to protest that is peaceful, and some people were saying that he shouldn't have done that. I don't know why they would even say that. That's to me is a very peaceful way to protest and gets the message across very well.
He didn't even bother anybody, and
Exactly.
they were upset. Why are you upset? He's not bothering you. If you don't like it, you don't have to like it. But let him be. Let him be, and expose yourself to why he's doing it. And that's the biggest thing: exposing yourself, learning. We're gonna reiterate. I'll reiterate it a billion times more. Learn. That's all. That's all. See why.
Yeah, well said. I 100% agree, Dan. You and I both know, I mean, we studied sports, we watch sports a lot, that these people and athletes in the game have been protesting and speaking their minds long before Colin Kaepernick has. These things are supposed to make people feel uncomfortable because guess what? There's a lot of uncomfortable things happening in the world right now, like what we're seeing with these police officers brutally terrorizing innocent people who are doing nothing, absolutely nothing, and they're getting tear gassed and they're getting beaten for just doing a peaceful protesting, standing idly by.
One video that actually infuriated me, to go off that topic, was there was a video of this young African-American man passionately speaking his heart out to this line of police it was in New York. And he was basically saying, like, I think to summarize what he said, I can't do it justice, but he was saying, like, I love each and every one of you. We can stand and do this together. Nobody has to get hurt. We can sit here peacefully. I love you, and I just want you to show that same love to me. And then, like, you could see some police officers nodding and listening, and then some guy just comes from the back who's a police officer, pushes them aside, and then, like, restrains the guy who had this, like, passionate, emotional speech, doing nothing violent whatsoever for no reason. It was so infuriating.
And it's infuriating that there are literally hundreds and hundreds of videos seeing that.
Exactly. That wasn't the only one. That's just the one that spoke to me most.
Yep.
But there's hundreds of videos where that same interaction happens, where you have protesters trying their best to show the police, like, we don't hate you, we just hate the system, right? Like, you people who aren't being violent right now, we don't hate. Like, as much as I disagree with the spreading of the message, not all cops are bad, because obviously it's distracting from the real issue, in my opinion, because obviously not all cops are bad, but like, not all cops are bad. There are cops who stand with the movement, who support it, but, like, the fact that there are cops out there that will continue to be violent towards protesters who were being very peaceful and very respectful towards other cops is what the problem is, and it's infuriating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the cops aren't really the ones who need our support right now, because at the end of the day, they can still take off their uniforms and go home. It's an escapable identity, which is not.
There's no such thing as blue lives, because they're not born blue.
Exactly.
It's a choice.
Exactly.
You can't choose to be born a person of color. You can choose to become a police officer. And in fact, it's a very
Exactly.
short process where you don't get enough training, in my opinion. But
There you go.
anyway,
Yes.
Truth.
I want to jump back real quick because we just mentioned about tear gas. I
Oh,
just think it's
God.
so strange about police's use of tear gas when, for two reasons, when the United States didn't offer, I believe it was they didn't offer any supplies like such as tear gas to the police officers when during the Hong Kong protests. They didn't want to give them any tear gas, and then also the fact that tear gas was banned in the Geneva Convention as illegal. It was a war crime to use it.
Oh, it
So
still is.
now, yeah, it
Yep,
still is. It's still a
yep.
war crime. So the fact that we're using it against our own civilians is just jarring. I can't even wrap my head around the fact that we would deem it illegal to use in war, but totally acceptable to use in peaceful protests.
And
I
during a
don't
pandemic.
right
Mhm.
during a
Which
pandemic
is
as well.
even
That also,
worse.
yes,
This is a respiratory disease, and you're attacking
exactly,
people with tear gas, which is restricting their breathing. Doesn't make
exactly.
any sense. Also, can we talk about how not safe it is to use rubber bullets on civilians? Like, people hear rubber bullets and they think, oh, these aren't really bullets. But if you've ever seen what a rubber bullet looks like, those things are massive. They can do so much damage to people. If
Right.
they're up close enough, they can penetrate your skull and kill you. They can take out your eyes and blind you for life. They're incredibly dangerous, and police are using them indiscriminately on civilians. There's
And
also
incorrectly.
incorrectly, yeah,
They're
of
supposed to
course.
be shooting them at the ground to bounce up into a crowd, which then negates the force that actually hits the crowd with.
Exactly. The
Where
force
they're
is
just
lost on the
pointing it,
ground.
yes, they're just pointing it at singular people, and some of the even the news crews are some. I believe a woman lost one of her eyesights in one of her eyes because
Yep,
it hit her in the
there was
face.
a camera woman who was working for some news network. I don't remember exactly which one. Who she's now blind in one of her eyes because they were just shot her randomly. And also, could we talk about there's that famous image out there where there was a 9-year-old girl who was tear gassed just for
Right.
like, not that I ever think there's any excuse whatsoever to use tear gas on any civilians, but what was the perceived threat of a 9-year-old child? Like, first of all, like,
And
I think it's unfair to say that I know like there's I don't think there's a perceived threat for anyone who is being tear gassed. Don't get me wrong, but it's like, how do you even justify that to anyone? I don't know. That's just
can't.
exactly.
That's a terrible way to disperse a crowd. That's very, very like dangerous. It hurts. Like it hurts your eyes, and especially when there's kids out there,
Mm.
the use of force in any manner right now is way too much.
About the rubber bullets, I found out the exact distance numbers. I just found a image of it. Sorry, my words right now. They're supposed to be used from 36 to 72 yards, but often they're being used from less than 30 yards. So not only are they shooting them wrong in terms of the aim, but they're also shooting them way too close.
Hurt them. And going back to all those journalists, and granted, they're cable journalists, they obviously have an agenda, whatever. The fact that you have these journalists who are out there doing the best they can to cover and give you all the information, the fact that they're getting hurt hurts me because I have a brother that's in journalism. He's a sports reporter, obviously no sports right now, so he's covering the news, out in Missouri. And it's frustrating. I think about him all the time. I worry for his sake. So the fact that journalists out there are getting hurt for doing their jobs, it's horrible. And studying journalism, that's all. It hits me very close. It really does.
Yeah, especially because these journalists don't really have a choice whether or not they're going to these sites. It's like, oh, they're probably just assigned to cover it. So the fact that you would shoot at them, whether or not first of all, you should never be shooting at people, regardless.
And let me just say this: after they identify themselves as press, like they're saying their names, we're part of the press. Do not shoot us. We're not doing anything wrong. We're just showing the pictures to the people.
Exactly. They were literally, they identified their goal, they identified who they were, and there was no excuse whatsoever to attack them. But here we are. It happened.
Crazy to think that they're asking like, please don't shoot, and then they get shot at. And like I know like they're rubber bullets. I know we just talked about how deadly they are, but like you can get hit how you can get hit in a bad spot and still do a lot of damage. Like you can get hit in the organs and have bruised ribs and have to go to the hospital for it. They're pretty lethal.
Now is not the time you want to be going to a hospital.
No, yeah,
Right.
that's a great
Exactly.
point.
Oh my gosh, I know.
That's another thing. Oh my goodness.
I gotta say the dedication for these protesters though, going out and standing up for what's right, even during a pandemic, is just amazing. I can't imagine how much bravery it takes to go out there knowing that
Yeah.
the coronavirus is still going on.
It speaks to
But
how much people are passionate about this.
yeah, exactly. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's really inspiring, like
Like,
that the majority are in this movement, that there's such a big group of people that are in support of it. So there's one positive
It's
thing
all
to come from
50.
this.
Sorry, it's all 50 states at this point too, and also
Right.
there's people protesting abroad for the same
Right, I
Mhm.
saw
thing.
that.
Oh yeah, I've seen that.
There was just
Mhm.
13 other countries or so, even more than that. I remember
Mhm.
seeing that number thrown around. Was 13 countries.
Yeah, it's a global
yep, exactly.
issue.
That's exactly what I was about to say. It has become a global movement, and that's very important too, because if you have other countries that are willing to align themselves with the communities that are being affected, that can also sway you. That can also, if your country is seen in a light that's not good, then it forces you to change, because you have to have relationships with different countries, and countries don't want to have a relationship with you because the police is flawed and they kill people for racist reasons.
And
That's hard.
the issue with the public opinion issue though is you need a leader who cares about the public opinion of other countries in order for that to make a difference. And I'm not really sure if we have that, but that's another point for maybe another time, because that's a very complex issue.
Yeah.
All I gotta say about that, it's just frustrating. That the
It's
fact that,
very frustrating.
you know,
Right. Well, I think, Sean, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I was thinking like it's easy to say that like there's change that needs to be made, but it's really hard to figure out how exactly it needs to be made. You know, let's we know all the wrong answers, so let's start there. Let's take away all the wrong answers.
Exactly. I think that's one of the best ways we can do that.
Right. No, I totally agree, guys. And this was a really, really great conversation. Before we wrap up, Dan, can you give us final thoughts and anything else that you want to add to wrap this episode up?
color. Yeah, I'm a double whammy for those of you that don't know me. I'm a double whammy. I'm African American and I'm a Latino.
Oh wow.
I don't really talk about the Latino part because I don't speak Spanish and I really don't identify with that culture. Which it's hard, but it is what it is. But I'm a double whammy. That's my reality. So when I'm out there, you know, and know this is like a cliche type of thing, but I do fear for my life. Like I don't know, how people are going to see me. I don't know what people are thinking about me, what their judgments are. I don't know if I'm being. It's hard to know that you always have to turn the other way and always look out for your own safety. And that there's a lot of people that don't understand that. I wish that people did understand that, because when it comes to situations like in Missouri or like in New York, in our hometown New York, you know and of course in Minneapolis, Chicago, all these places, Georgia, where they had a issue where there was a killing of a black man because of a white police officer, it's it's tough. It really can be tough to know that you're in that scenario where it could be you. And I just hope one day people understand that. And it's going to take time. I understand that, but you know, when we really put our minds to it, it will benefit in the end. It's like I said in one of my posts, solidarity means strength. We need to be together. We need togetherness. We put more power into things if we fight all as one.
That was really well said, Dan. And I'll tell you this, Dan, I see you as one of the nicest people that I know, and I see you as one of my great friends that I met in school. And I'm with you 100%, man. I'm supportive of whatever you do, and whatever you need me to do to help. And everyone here on the show feels the same way. Whatever we need to do to help you and your movement, you have my support, and you have everyone else's support on the show as well.
Make sure that you know who your leaders are. Know if they're not necessarily elected officials. Know who the leaders are in terms of like your community, your activists, whatever the case may be. You know, get them involved. Get yourself involved in their movements. Have a conversation with them. Whatever you can to get the attention of the people that are supposed to serve you. That's all I ask for. It's not much. It's not asking for much. Just do that.
Thank you so much for coming on the show to educate us. I want to make that clear. You're educating us.
And it's like I told you beforehand, I'm not an expert at this. This is not something that I studied, but I base this on experience and, just reading about it, myself. Because again, there have been times where, I've been stopped. It wasn't anything big. They let me go, but still, my own experiences matter too. So I'm just educating the way I can.
And you did a great job, and I truly, truly appreciate you telling us about these stories because it's important. And I have an obligation, even if it's a little show like this, to bring knowledge and bring on people that are going through this every day. And I don't understand the experiences, and a lot of people don't understand the experiences, and that's why we need to hear from people like you so we can be educated and we can advocate for change and really, really make a difference.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your experiences and your perspective because we really do appreciate it. And it's been a pleasure getting to know you through this conversation.
Thanks
and I
for
hope
having
you
me on. Thanks for having me on.
But first, Dan, you have your own show. You have your own podcast. Why don't you plug that, my friend?
plug it up.
Plug it up.
Yeah, so
Plug it up.
we're only 6 episodes in. It's fairly new. We started it during quarantine, but it's called the Sports Insanity Podcast. We talk about sports. Obviously, during this time of shutdown, it's hard to talk about any type of sporting event because there aren't any. But we do the best we can. So we're doing episode 7 soon. So subscribe when you can. You can listen to us on Podbean at Sports Insanity, on YouTube at Sports Insanity. Our Twitter handle is Sports Insanity 2, and on Facebook at Sports Insanity. And then, we're trying to get, at some point, we're going to get our podcast in other places, but right now it's just on Podbean. It's just easier just to start someplace. And, when our show builds up, we'll put it out somewhere else. But yeah, episodes come out beginning of the week. Some usually on Sunday or Monday, maybe Tuesday if we're lazy enough. So we do the best we can. But yeah, it's all sports podcast. Sports Insanity Podcast is the name of it. Hope you tune into it. It's a great show. I do it with my 2 best friends. We started this thing out in college. We took a 5-year break, and now we're back doing it as a podcast. So we're totally excited about this new venture, and I hope that for all the sports fans out there that wanted to listen and chime in, They can subscribe to us on YouTube, listen to us on Podbean, and follow us on our journey. It's amazing.
I'll have to check that out.
And not many people know sports better than Dan Ryan's, and that's for sure. Dan, we got to make sure, when the NBA comes back on, dude, we got to bring you on the show again. We'll do a special episode.
Oh, totally. Sports. I miss sports so much. So, but by the way, you can. By the way, if you want to follow me, at Dan_Ryans, DAN_RYANS on Twitter, and then the same thing, but you add a 1 on my Instagram.
Awesome. We'll plug all those links in the description below, so you should just be able to click it and give you a follow.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Also, real quick,
I appreciate it.
I've been on the show like 5 times now. I've never plugged my social media because I don't really care about growing it. But since right now I've been sharing a lot of resources about Black Lives Matter and the movement in general, if anyone's interested in following me for that information, my @ is jconroy330 on pretty much everything. I share the most probably on Instagram, so hope that helps.
Yes, Jeremy, you are sharing a lot, and that's good. I'll make sure I link your stuff as well, because you're definitely educating me for sure on links and stuff to sign up for and text and call, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys, so thank you so much again for listening to this episode. It was really important that we do it when the time is right for the Dreamcast Guy episode that we did. So everyone, thanks so much for listening.
It was a good one.
It was a good
I
one.
liked it.
Yeah.
So everyone, thank you so much for listening. We hope you learned something, and Black Lives Matter.
Exactly. Black Lives Matter.
Always.